What's up, everybody? Hello, my friends. We got so many questions this week. I don't know what happened, but it bumped up to like double the usual. So we'll try to get to as many as we can. I've been moving, so things have been really crazy. I'm a little behind on getting podcast stuff up, but there's gonna be lots of podcast stuff when we get Jon going. Jon coming up. Connecting. What's up, buddy? How are you?
Good. How you doing?
Good. I was just saying that, I've been moving, so I've been a little behind on getting the audio of some of these things up. We got like six or seven that I haven't put up yet for the audio podcast version. The one I did with Donut as well. There's going to be lots of clips coming up soon. So especially from these Q&As where we're answering a lot of very specific questions, we'll get a bunch of these clips up on YouTube as well as the Live with Matt Rad Instagram, which is in my bio. I know you've been sharing some of the clips that we've been putting up there, some great little bits from our conversations, because the first 10 conversations or so were very much just us kind of shooting the shit, taking some questions, and we're going to continue to do that. But in the middle there's some interesting things. We got so many questions this week.
Let's jump in.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what happened, but the one thing that I thought would be cool for you and I, it's something that I didn't quite think to mention yesterday when I saw you and you're helping me with studio stuff. But I think you and I have lots and lots of overlapping ideas and workflows and sonic taste and that sort of thing, but we also have different roles. So I think some of these questions, it seems like there's a lot more questions from people that are more in the writer, producer, home studio realm. And so I think it would be valuable for you and I to endeavor to answer some of these questions from both our perspectives and both what you do, what I do, where they overlap, where they differ, because I think that'd be very helpful for people, because I think sometimes people will hear something and it doesn't necessarily apply as much to them as they might otherwise think. Right. So shit, I mean, dude, there's so many questions. It's really fantastic.
Let's go. We'll see who should answer first. We'll just pass them off.
Let's see. A lot of people asking me about my new setup here. Cause the Unfuck Your Studio guys came by with you yesterday, and, I've been looking and getting getting new monitors, which I've mentioned a few times on these before. And of course you're a big proponent of PMCs, and I have the 228s up here, which I'm going to demo for a few weeks. It seems pretty clear that I'm going to keep these. They're great, but they sounded
so good yesterday.
Yeah, it's only briefly. So I love these PMCs.
Let's talk about that for a second. From my perspective of walking into a room that you had a little bit of a head start on, right? You had the treatment that you're used to having to a degree, added a mattress.
Well, let's give people context real quick. So I've had a number of different studios. I've worked in super professional studios that I've had lockouts in. I had the people at Swing House, which they now renamed in Atwater, actually build me a room from scratch. Then I was in my house for 2 years. So basically made a studio in my living room that had some treatment, but was obviously not constructed that way. And now I'm staying at this place for several months, probably 6 months, that friends of mine who are in England are letting me stay at for a bit. So I'm going to be here and have sort of a temporary home setup. It's literally a living room. The kitchen's right there. The bedroom's right there. So I think
such a vibe.
And I think it'd be useful for people to think about the context of a lot of these things, because most people don't have the ability to build walls, cut slabs, put up a lot of sound.
Or maybe just don't want to.
I don't want to.
I could.
I'm not building any walls. I'm not adding anything. I mean, I have, you can see I have some soft materials, and I have some other things that are going to go up. We're going to probably put a very small cloud, something above it, but it's going to be very minimal in terms of the treatment. So sorry.
Wait, hold on. Yeah.
I want to give the context. So go for it.
Jumping in from there. Please. So you kind of had what you thought the treatment could be up against the wall, and then the dudes come in and they're like, cool, that could be a version of this, but we need to hear what these speakers sound like up against a solid wall with nothing there. And then we'll go from there. There was a mattress and then 3 of your tube traps.
Yeah.
Pulled them all out. put these speakers flat up against the wall, which is against what most studio builders think is the way to go, or you want them a few feet from the wall. It's like, no, we want them as close to the wall as possible to energize the room, right? So you have a fairly long room. It's probably 25 feet. So, bass low end waves are going to be able to extend fully in that room, which is really exciting. That's a great starting point. It's when you're in a bedroom where the room is only 10 to 11 feet that you have to worry about where that first bass reflection is going to come back to you at. That's less of an issue in your room already. So we don't necessarily need to put absorption on that front wall, right? It's not the first go-to approach that they're coming at, which I found interesting too. I've seen them do this quite a bit, but I'm rarely in the room when they're doing it from scratch. And I thought that was interesting. Then the speakers go up, and I know PMCs for a decade at this point, so they press play on these records that we just listened to at my spot the Wednesday before this, because we were doing some modifications, tightening my drivers, and just doing some things and listening.
That's an important thing, real quick. A reference playlist. So they have recordings that they know very well, and we were talking about a bunch too, because I have sort of my usual references. When you're in a new environment, you're changing speakers, have a set of recordings that you know very, very well. Not necessarily that they're your favorite songs or
they're not sounding for them,
but it's like some of them are, this is the brightest possible pop vocal, and let's see how the speakers sound, how the room sounds with this. This one has a big low end sweep because I know how that partition.
Here's how mid-range transients sound like. Where's articulation going to be on tweeters, on mid-range? All different reasons and all different utility for different songs.
Getting a playlist. I think everybody who's a record maker in any respect, even if you're just a songwriter, like, get a group of songs on a playlist that you can take in anywhere, so you know what speakers sound like, what a studio sounds like, so you can get a sense. Please make me a rep playlist.
Make your own.
Make your own. Yeah, I think you got to make your own. I think find the recordings that you know well, because it's not about getting the perfect sounding song. It's getting recordings that you go, I know this. Anyway, continue. So you were playing songs,
So I heard parallels from my room that I think sounds fantastic, and I've been in for just shy of 5 years now. Mixes are translating. It's a successful room. And then they press play with no treatment up, and I'm like, oh, I could work in here. Like, I can make decisions already. So I'm coming at it as an active engineer who's making decisions, every minute of the day, other than when I'm at your house. And it sounded refreshing and comfortable, right? So then, starting from there, but all to say, started from a blank slate, a white wall, any color, but the wall was white and there was nothing on it, and the speakers sounded good, right? You walk in that room. Walk in that room, and the ceilings are high. It's wood. It felt cozy in there. There wasn't a lot of unwanted reflections. Now, granted, there needs to be more work, right? So then you put Rory set two of those tube traps up on left and right to catch some early reflections. They were not up against the wall. They were out, visualizing where the tweeter is going to send frequencies out, and then catching those first reflections of the highest frequencies we can get, right? So again, not traditional where you would think that these things need to be. Very, very particular placement for these things. I thought that was very interesting to see it in real time, because now once you get a cloud and maybe one piece of absorption 4 inches on that back wall, you're good. Yeah. And that's not going to cost that much money. This is a cost-effective way of moving in for a 6-month minimum. Who knows how temporary this space is? You could be there for a year, and you spent. I don't actually know what it's going to cost. I'm imagining it's way less than a month's rent, right?
Yeah, so it's not much.
Yeah. So point being, there's cost-effective ways of setting up your room, and I think people assume and not to reach out to people like them because what they think that something like that is going to cost, when panels aren't that much money. You can install them yourselves to a degree. A cloud might be difficult, but this is accessible stuff, is my point. And your room sounds workable right away. All those low frequencies were heard in a speaker with 8-inch drivers like those 228s.
Yeah. And I'll say two things real quick, or maybe three things. One, and it's something I discussed with the guys yesterday, that if you are someone who's making records, at least spending, $1,000 or something like that to get some movable sound equipment, you'll use it forever in every studio you're ever in. It's an investment that you'll literally use forever as long as you continue to make records. So to get a few well-made panels, or in my case, I'm probably going to have one or two, but also I have these tube traps, which are
you already had some existing, but that's your point. They stayed with you from the last place.
They stayed with me through 3 places.
Right.
And they're going to, so the other thing, what I want to go back to real quick on the playlist, because a bunch of people in the comments were saying, send me the playlist. It's fine for us to we could send you a playlist, but the thing to do is to think about it conceptually. What you want to do is have a playlist of recordings that you know very well, that you know different aspects of them very well. Exactly. So you have some things where this is a very bright recording where maybe you recorded it and the vocals are super bright and you're like, this is as bright as I want vocals to be. So you bring it into a studio and then you know kind of the level of how bright vocals can be, or something that's sort of a warmer, darker recording that has really great mid-range, have a few of those so you know how the mid-range is going to sound. Same thing with low end. My reference, I think I said on another stream, I talked about the intro to Speaker Box Love Below, where they have an 808 go do 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 do. It's literally an 808 going down like that. And the Unfuck Your Studio guys had Partition, which has a big 808 sweep in it. So that sort of thing, just
all the way down.
Yeah, and so what you do is you have a good reference for what low end is supposed to sound like. So that's how I would think about it: is get a bunch of recordings well.
Sorry, shout out to Volta there.
That's the song you mixed, huh?
No, it wasn't me. It was someone else.
Oh, someone else. Okay.
No.
So the short answer to a bunch of people asking me both sort of proper questions and in the DMs, I'll talk more about the studio as it evolves and as my experience evolves with it. But thus far, PMCs, the 228s sound amazing. I've used all kinds of different monitors in the past, from NS10s to ATCs to Dynaudios, Genelecs, Atom.
All of them.
And they're all kind of different. They all kind of do slightly different things. PMC, the first thing, low end is always tough because all the rooms are different, and how low end is going to resonate is going to be different in every room. So I need to kind of get used to that, although it's very good and very even. The high end is fucking magical on them. It sounds really great. It's very clean. It's very clear. It's bright, but not hard. It's all the things you want.
And when it's bright, it's because the song is bright.
Yeah. And of course, PMCs are, a level of a price range beyond a lot of the things I mentioned. So it really is, it's an investment, but this is where I'm at in my career. And if you got $8,000 to spend on speakers, or if you're at that place where you're going to be making high level records, that's, as we've talked about a lot, it's like monitoring is hugely, hugely important.
Number one.
It might be a good transition. There were a few questions about home studio stuff. Angel asked if you had a tiny home studio in an apartment with 2 or 3 pieces of equipment and a digital audio workstation, what would you do? And my thought was maybe to answer that in a slightly different way, which is to say, these sort of things depend on what you are doing. If you are looking to be a mixer, if you're going the direction of Jon and you're trying to be a professional mixer, ultimately you are going to have to spend thousands and thousands of dollars getting great monitors, a great setup, great converters, all that kind of stuff.
Great computer.
I think if you are...
Let's start with the computer.
Yeah, great computer. Well, so that's the question. So let's say you're starting out and you are, you're in your early 20s and you're making beats and you're recording some vocals and you're an artist, you're self-contained. I mean, again, the answer will also change if you are just trying to be a producer. If you're not doing lots of vocals and you're not a vocalist, it might not be as important. Or
what's a producer without the ability to record vocals?
That's true. That's
not a producer. That's a beat maker.
So basically, what you
do you want? Let's just.
But there's those people too. There are those people too.
Yeah. But I want to separate them in the conversation from the beginning.
But let's say you're some sort of self-contained person. I think it's computer that's going to be reliable. A program of your choice. I don't know that it matters that much. I mean, I talked
whatever
about
you're comfortable in.
Yeah, I talked about a previous live with Dono where he went through Fruity Loops and Ableton and sort of his workflow and Pro Tools and Logic, and I started on Cubase. There's lots of great options for it.
Probably makes sense to know more than one.
probably makes sense to know more than one. I don't use, it's the program I use the least, but I would actually probably recommend Logic for starting for anybody, because it's so easy.
You can do everything in there.
You can do everything. It's an Apple product now. So if you get an Apple laptop that'll do the job, get Logic, get a simple, I don't know. I mean, what it really just depends how much money you have to spend. But I think a simple USB interface and a simple microphone, and you can get out of there for a couple $1,000s. I think that's kind of the starting point, and a MIDI keyboard. And then from there, it's monitoring. What you talk about it. I don't know. I'm kind of freestyling on it.
I don't have anything to I think you said it. I'm going to have a completely different version of that, and I'm not sure it's as useful as what you just said.
Well, let's say it's only a few $1,000s, and there's a lot of people who are watching who are trying to sort of make their way up. You got to get your basic stuff. It's going to be a few $1,000s, and then monitors. You think
spend it all on monitors in your computer.
Once you have your basic setup,
because then you can start hearing what you like. That's This is the kind of the reverse way that we're taught from Guitar Center and Sam Ash and these companies, and all the way up to Vintage King and some of the more higher level retailers, is that you need to start at the bottom and build up in price point. I'm kind of thinking it's the opposite, and not necessarily starting with your mic preamp. You need a MIDI keyboard. Yes, so a MIDI keyboard, laptop, speakers. That's what you need. You're going to need some sort of interface. I think having the speakers first, that's the thing. That's how you determine if you like the interface you get, you like the microphone preamp that you get, and you like the microphone that you get, and you like the synthesizers and drum sounds that you choose, right? So when you're making a beat, it's about sound choice, right? You can't save it in the mix. So coming from a mixer, the mixes that sound the best on my end are the best sound choices from the producer beforehand. And as a mixer and an engineer, when I was producing and when I do produce, I'm listening for the best sound first. I'm not trying to fix it later and make it cool later. So speakers will determine your arrangement and your sound choice from the beginning. So I was going to train an engineer named Hallie in Nashville. She's now working at the Hit Lab with my friend Nathan Dantzler. I really wanted her. She was supposed to move to LA, and she was going to come work with me and my team for a bit this summer, and wound up not working out. But one of the things she said before she was coming to work with me was, I have this amount of money. What do I need? And I did this with her, and she bought PMC Result 6s, and she has zero regrets. I'd argue you can make the most professional sounding records possible as an engineer, producer, whoever you are, with those speakers that are $3,000, not $8,000 like the ones that you're listening to. Yeah. Yes, there's a level above, but it's different. It's not necessarily a level above, except for its sonic capacity, like its full range. You're never going to get the sub that you got on your speakers in that room out of Result 6s, but you're going to get a very similar high-end clarity and mid-range clarity from the driver. So I always say speaker first. And then, like I said last week, buy a converter that gets you into the box with a microphone and anything you need to be recording ideas, but know that that's temporary, right? If you don't have the budget to spend, don't get a middle ground converter and mid speakers. Get the best speakers you can afford to get, and get a not as good converter, and then elevate the converter as money starts coming in. I think that's kind of the reverse, and that's my recommendation. We talked about it with you. Just one more thought. We talked about it with you yesterday about when you were asking about what I said last week about the Lynx versus an Apollo, and Spider brought up a really good point, which I forgot to mention last week, and I wanted to say it again, which is the stacking of sounds through a better converter, and the space that they don't additively accumulate bad artifacts, cheap artifacts. So you might not notice it from one sound, but when you're recording 8 Juno layers, you're going to notice them stacking up like a record, and you're not going to have to be carving. So it's the additive nature of these higher level converters that's when you really notice. I'm sensitive enough to notice a difference right away. But you're adding the minimal distortion adds up cumulative. So we were talking about yesterday, and I wanted to point that out. Yeah,
and I think I agree with you, and I would also say that is a place, knowing a lot of the people that I'm in DMs with, that's many thousands of dollars beyond where a lot of these people are at. So I think that's useful for some of the audience, and for other people in the audience, getting a setup that is where you have all the essential things, and getting good enough I mean, you're talking about speakers that don't carry huge amounts of low end in the Result 6, and they're $3,000. They're amazing speakers. I would imagine, knowing
they cover plenty
bit.
of low end. I'm just talking about the difference between 3 and 8K.
Totally.
Driver size.
I think there's a lot of people that that can't spend $3,000 on monitors. So I don't have good advice for what to get lower than that. I think it really is about
this. The Dyne Audios are pretty good. Those
Dyne Audios are good. Something that
doesn't sound overly hyped.
Something that doesn't sound super hype, and something that's just fun, honestly, especially if you're in early career creative mode. That's another reason to talk about things like make your computer great, because
stability in a room. If an artist is trying to flow and you're like, oh, my computer is crashing, come on, that's number one. That's why computer is number one, followed by monitors. If your computer can't handle someone trying to freestyle an idea on top of your beat, that's not. No one's going back to that room.
That's going to ruin your workflow. So
exactly.
I think that kind of covers that.
What do we got?
Man, there were a lot of questions on converters. Maybe since we just did some of that. So
what?
Again, sort of like, where in the arc of your career does it make sense to spend more money? Can you just touch on 80 to DA converters? Eli asks, when and why would you want better converters, Burl, Hilo, etc. And then Kevin asks, is the Grace 905S USB digital audio converter acceptable?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
that's what I have. That's my last stack in my chain. So that's how I'm monitoring back. I have the Hilo on my in and output bus for my mix bus, and for recording and hardware inserts, I have the Lynx Aurora, which is 16 in and out, and sounds fucking great. Sounds clean. I'm constantly stacking, a bunch of tube gear on things, and it's just clearer than I can imagine ins and outs being. Where in the arc, that's kind of what we were talking about. That's unanswerable in a sense, because it's purely financial. You could be at the beginning of your career and someone's investing $30,000 into you, and that's not an obstacle.
Where in the budget, probably.
Yeah, where in the budget.
And what you're doing too. I think there is something where if you're a songwriter and it inspires you to not have the greatest converters, but instead have a Prophet 6, and that's your $3,000 trade-off. Get the Prophet.
Let's separate it to two positions, even though there's way more in between. The extremes, starters and finishers. If you're a songwriter, a producer, a beat maker that's starting an idea, and you intend to pass it off to a finisher, whether that's a mixer, additional producer, executive producer, wherever the finisher, pre-mastering, let's say pre-mastering, we could add mastering to this conversation as well, but let's stick between producer and mix engineer, develop relationships with those people. And I would say if you're a starter, this matters slightly less in the beginning. And then if you're a finisher, it is the most important part.
Yeah.
And those are the two extremes. Find where you are at in your circumstance on the spectrum. We cannot answer that for anybody. But if you're trying to be a mixer and trying to my career trajectory, I started out with some Apogee Rosettas back in the day when they were kind of affordable. My first kind of HD system. I think I bypassed the 192s because I hated Avid hardware. Those Rosettas sound terrible. I thought that they were good because Apogee branding was so great. Not cool. Waste of money. Got rid of those and got Lynx pretty much. And I got Lynx because of the connectivity with Pro Tools. So the way that they read, it looks like an HDIO. So software to hardware compatibility is on point. Hardware inserts have no delay. You don't have to calibrate anything. Like, it just works. They have an HD card, and their Thunderbolt cards are fast. Then it's just a modern approach to clear conversion. So then you're a producer. Like we said last week, get yourself an Apollo, make a beat. I'd be mindful of how much you're recording through that Apollo Twin and stacking. If you're completely synthetic and you're making beats with samples and drums that are pre-existingly recorded, I think that's a great way to become a starter. And I wouldn't say spend much more than that. Always know in the back of your head that you're going to pick better sounds through a better DAC at the end before you're monitoring. And I think that's something that you can aspire to have. But on the opposite ends of the spectrum, I think that covers that.
That's a good distinction too. So a couple of people asked, what if you're a starter and a finisher? It depends, depends on all the factors. This is the part where it gets complicated. We really can't answer it for you. What is your budget? Where are you getting paid the most? What are you getting hired the most for? Are you getting paid to mix things, but you're trying to write more top line and lyrics? Are you mostly doing lots of sessions, but you're trying to work your way into becoming more of a finisher mixing engineer? All of those things. And then what is your budget? How much are you getting paid for records? All those things. It changes the conversation. And how much if you're a starter, how much are you actually recording things? Like you said, if you have cheaper converters and preamps and mics and things like that, and you're doing lots and lots of actual recording, either recording keyboards, recording mics, recording acoustic instruments, you probably want to spend more money investing in the hardware that's going to make that pipe, that series of pipes.
It's really an assessment of what your priorities are going to be. And it also brings me to a thought that constantly having internally and externally with people like you and my conversations crew, like I don't see people up until recently holding the engineer role and career as a coveted position in the record making process. Everybody wants to be a producer. Everyone's like wants that PROD credit, produced by, because it happened on SoundCloud where producers became artists. And then there's the producer of the year Grammy award. And there's no engineer of the year. There's best engineered record, but everyone involved on the recording of that gets it. It's not specific. So we don't kind of have this elevated view of what a finisher or a mixer even looks like. So I'm not sure that people at the beginning even think that this is a possibility, something they want to become. There's very few. And recording engineers, you got to really have a love for old Beatles records to want to be a recording engineer at this point, because you're winding up sitting in a room recording vocals mostly to 2 tracks. And, unless you're working on more independent, organic live records, which can be great, just a more of a niche in the world that we, I think, exist in. That's something to be determined along the way, and gear plays a part in that. What story do you want to tell about yourself in the room when clients come in? Do you want to have an MPC 3000 and an Apollo Twin is a version of a beat maker, and then there's the beat maker that has a drum kit set up, live bass through an Ampeg, tube amp, and you have all the sound stations, like Brian Eno refers to them, also in the room, as well as the MPC. You might also want high-end converters, and that you're telling a story with the gear to a degree of what you're interested in. But I want to really pinpoint the idea that if you want, and this is again from my perspective I came out the other side of being a producer and an engineer and a songwriter and a beat maker and kind of all the things to, I'm a mix engineer now 98% of the time. Converters should have been a higher consideration earlier on for me, because I'm determining that final sound, and people with cheaper converters and don't really care about sonics as much, they come to me for that, right? So it's a positioning in your role that you should take seriously, and then realize that the investment is necessary for that.
Yeah, I think those are great thoughts, and the short answer is it depends for everybody, and roles are going to continue to change too, and what people what role a person has. You may start out, like you said, as a producer and become a mix engineer. You might become a Skrillex type person where you're actually mastering it, and yet he's doing it in the box because he's not doing lots of external recordings. And
when he does, he goes to a studio.
When he does, he goes to a proper studio. So, and I don't know what setup Sonny has, but I would imagine he's not running around with all of the best, most expensive converters everywhere he goes that are his setup. Does some things in the box. I know he did a lot of the stuff mixing on headphones. I mean, look, the answer is it's going to be specific to you, but hopefully a bunch of those thoughts help.
Let's hit Evan's comment right here. There's also the simple fact that mixer is the producer in a lot of levels. That doesn't read right. No, the mixer is not the producer in a lot of levels. The mixer is the mixer and the producer is the producer, unless deemed otherwise. So if you're going to use those two words, we have to define them separately. And then if you're sharing the role, that is deem that to a degree. I'm not hired as the producer when I'm hired as the mixer. I could be hired as the additional producer and mixer, and so can Matt. Matt does that as well. But we can't just say that's a simple fact, because that's not the case. I don't know what that means.
Well, I'm not sure exactly what it means, but I know a lot of the names of roles are just changing, and things are going to continue to change. Mixer can definitely be a big part of the production.
Can be, but that's not always, and that's a distinction that needs to be made.
But also, there were recordings from, I don't know, the 20s through the 60s where mixer didn't even really exist. It was kind of just engineer. I mean, these things are changing so much now, where if you have a laptop and a vocal mic, you can get a whole thing done, and you're mixer and writer and producer and engineer and beat maker and mastering engineer. But then you get into someone like Jon, where, the sounds are all there, but then Jon takes it to another level and takes it to another level of clarity and focus. And so he's a mixer. Like on the Khalid stuff, you were doing co-mixing. Like there's all kinds of ways that,
let's hit this other question above from Phil Barnes. Hey, Jon, what made you solidify as a mixer over your other roles? I really like that question, because it's something I've had to come to terms with a lot, and I don't necessarily know when it happened, except for one.
Wait, Jon, real quick, speak on it. And we're going to do a thing that we haven't done yet, which is I need to go pee. So go speak on it for a minute, and I'm going to go pee.
Oh, that's hard. Okay.
No, go. You're good. Just talk about your arc.
Okay. No, it's not even about the arc. This is weird that Matt's not here right now, so we're just going to let it be. But I thought that I wanted. Not that I thought. I love when records came out. And as a producer, so many things that you do are speculative. And as a producer, I realized that I think doing 300 songs in maybe 3 years of, getting signed to a publishing deal with BMG and going in the room with a bunch of people, sometimes 2 different people a day, and you're doing this thing, so many songs, and like 4 came out with artists that I liked and songs that I liked. And I made probably $0 from all of that time. Felt like a wild thing. Oh, he's back. So when I realized mixers finish products and they come out, that was more exciting. So you're actually on things that people are consuming and having emotional.
Screw everything up. There we go.
You did. As a mixer, I was involved in so many more releases. Songs came out and people were giving feedback on them and feeling something from them, both good and bad. And there was a reaction, and I want to have as much impact as possible, right, on the little world that we occupy as music makers. And the whole speculative thing of songs not coming out and hard drives filled with songs that are pretty good, right? Like I don't hate all the things that are on the drive. I think I've done really solid work as a producer. I wanted releases to happen, and releases are what make music and emotion thrive, and all the things we do things for.
Yes, I did wash my hands, Dylan.
Good question.
It's interesting, man. I feel that too, because I've definitely gone stretches where things aren't coming out, but I'm making a lot of stuff, and it can definitely be frustrating. I think I'll just tell the reverse of it, even though no one asked me. I like just making sounds. I like sitting by myself and making funny sounds, and just without intention other than to explore. And that's always been a really important part of my emotional life since I was probably like 10, and that's just never really gone away. I mean, once this setup gets going, I'm probably just gonna smoke a joint and just make sounds for a few days and not worry about anything else, because I just like exploring and doing, and I like that more than I like only doing mixing. I've done longer stretches of mixing. I've mixed albums and things like that, where that's been really enjoyable for a week or two. But at a certain point, I just start going, I need to do something myself. I need to write a melody or write a lyric or get together with an artist and start things from scratch and have an emotional conversation, all that. So, I think that's an important, you and I've talked about doing a stream that's just about career arcs, and how to sort of, I think the main thing there is figuring out who you are as a creative person is a really difficult thing to talk about because there aren't a lot of good answers to it, but it's a really important part of what we do, figuring out what you like, what appeals to you, what makes you feel happy day to day. I mean, being mindful of your time and your emotional worth and all that kind of stuff. And those are decisions that don't get made for most people early on in a career. As a career starts going, you start going, okay, well, now I'm at this place. I could make a little more money doing this. Would it make me happy? Do I want to do a little more of this, which might not be as easy, but it's going to do this for me? Or I have a family. I mean, all these sorts of things are important considerations. You've definitely settled into clearly the right thing.
I mean, it settled in on myself. It just, that's what people were hiring me to do. Maybe I was better at that than at producing and making beats. I think that one of 20 beats that I make are probably good. One of 100 beats that I make are probably good. And I think most of the mixes that I turn in are good, right? Or usable or however people deem it. I think just that's what people wound up seeing me as someone that can offer them something in return, right? Like most of the relationships in music industry are transactional. We can become friends through it, like we became friends through a dinner after working on a project together yet. We've never really worked together, but you're still introduced to me via music, right? Yeah. So the industry can offer you most of my closest friends are met through music, but a lot of them were transactional at first, and then we realized we fucked with each other, right? Yeah. So motivation, there's so many motivations and reasons. Money is a bad motivator. To a degree, you need money, right, to keep going. I need to uphold a certain lifestyle in my team. I have a bunch of people on the team. Not a bunch, but there's 5 people from lawyer to assistants and manager and the whole operation. And that matters. So I might take a gig specifically for a financial purpose. And I think to myself, as we all do, like, okay, how much time is going to be allotted to that? And what does that offer me for creative freedom in the long run and other things? So there's a lot of motivators, but just jumping back to the question of when I started realizing I'm going to be a mixer was, I meant to mention this before you came back, was one of the motivations was I'm a small town kid from Long Island, New York, and I left home and I had been gone for so many years. And the only way my mom could justify the fact that I left was if she heard stuff on the radio that I worked on. And I never even cared about working on records that were on the radio. I was doing indie bands in Long Island and jazz records and folk artists and things that would never be on top 40 radio. But when my mom heard the first song that was on the radio, it was like, oh, that's why he left, right? There's a tangibility factor in that motivation that lets your family know. Whether you're tight with them or not, it's irrelevant. There's just kind of this thing that okay, cool. They're doing something that is legitimate. And it's not a pipe dream necessarily. Like a lot of people move to LA and it feels like a pipe dream probably for their families. And I was able to kind of flip that script by having like a couple of songs a year on the radio. Most of the stuff that I work on is not on the radio. But I have a couple a year. And then my mom could be like, oh, I heard that when I was in, Target or whatever. And that motivation has helped pursue my want to make popular music as well as some weirder shit that I also like to work on.
Man, I kind of want to talk about this for like 5 hours. It's such an interesting topic.
We can, though. There's plenty of questions. I mean, we can jump. Let
me say one more thing on that topic, and then let's maybe jump to a couple more of the technical questions. I mean, we literally got dozens of questions today, which is great. Thank you guys for sending them in, and we're gonna get to all of them. Either I'll DM people back, or we'll get to them next week if we don't get to them now.
Jumping feet first is hard, Jared. It's not even feet first, man. It's full body submerged in water right away.
One thing I will say, the last thing I wanted to add on this, and many other people have talked about this, not just in music but in other creative fields. And I think almost every music person I know and every creative person I know has this decision or realization at some point that there's a way to do this creative thing, that you start out the creative thing and you're visually responsive.
Sorry, I'm listening to you.
That everybody starts out doing this thing for no money because they love it. They feel a compulsion. Their friends do it, or whatever it is. That's some sort of social, emotional thing that doesn't have anything to do with money. And there are lots of points where you get confronted with the ability to make more money than you've made before. And maybe that's from zero to a little bit. Maybe that's from a little to a medium amount. Maybe that's a lot to a whole lot. It happens at every stage of it. And you have to, for lack of a better term, look within yourself and figure out if you want to trade off the purity of why you're doing it, or how much of the purity you want to trade off for money. And there is a way to do this to make a whole lot of money and stop enjoying making music. And I've seen it happen to people. I've been confronted with it a few times working on projects, especially when coming up. But, I remember a 2-month record that I made where I was an engineer on it. And I really enjoyed a lot of the process, but I wasn't producing, and I was spending 10, 11, 12 hours a day recording loud, distorted guitars and tuning vocals and comping. And that's a part of the process, and it was great training, and it was amazing.
Yeah, necessity.
But at the end of the day, my ears were tired, and I could not listen to music or make music that I really loved. So I went for 6 weeks without being exposed to any music that I was passionate about. And that's a weird feeling. That's, that's me at 25 or 26 and having gone the previous 16 years always doing things because I had some sort of love for it. Even when I was collaborating or I was getting paid and we're making compromises and it felt like a job sometimes. But there was a time where I went a month and a half without enjoying music at all. And that's a really weird feeling. And those things can happen if I was listening to a David show from years ago on Rogan talking about taking an illustrating job, and he got a job with a Hollywood studio doing movie posters, and then he realized he was drawing Chris O'Donnell's face 7 different ways for a week, and he's like, I don't want to do this. This is the dream, but I don't want to do it. So you really do have to...
It's a dream.
It's a dream. It's somebody's dream.
It's somebody's dream, yeah.
And a lot of other people might tell you that this is what you need to do. And there is something to be said about paying your dues, working your way up. It's important to be mindful of that stuff, because if you get in the habit of not prioritizing your own passion for this stuff, you can get into a position where you're just like, oh, if I do another year or two like this, then I'll be able to. And if then all of a sudden that's 2 years of your life, you're not making shit the way you want. Doesn't mean you shouldn't go pay dues. Doesn't mean you should go learn from people. You should go humble yourself. And sometimes it's getting coffee. Sometimes it's wrapping cables. Sometimes it's making a whole bunch of stuff that you know is going to get you to the next level. But it's really important to think about what it is that you really love about the process, and make sure no matter what you're doing that you're accessing that.
Yes,
that's my creative
great. No, let's cap that conversation there and do something else. That's great. Nothing else to add.
Total opposite end of the spectrum. We've talked about this a little bit, but maybe you can do a quick riff. Yanni asked, how do you control harshness in a mix? You and I have talked about saturation. We've talked about occasional multiband compression, talked about tubes. You got any just quick, somebody's at a home studio, they don't have a ton of gear. Is there any sort of a couple of thoughts?
Yeah, I can talk about, I know people love hearing specific tools. So this is an easy one to discuss a specific tool that I like to use, which I don't like to discuss, but we'll do it for this purpose. I really love the Ozone 9 Spectral Shaper for controlling harshness as a handicap plugin that's just on the mix bus. So taking, depending on where we're at, 2.5K up to 4.5K, let's say, for example, maybe 2 to 5, maybe 2 to 8, it changes on every mix, and just warming that up. There's a character knob or slider there that just kind of sets the character you're looking for, and then a threshold. It's really simple, and it's a good way to kind of warm that up without reducing it too much, without getting rid of it. I'm really subtractive, so I'll EQ upper mids a lot. That's based on the Fletcher-Munson curve, that we hear that region of frequencies louder by 3 or so dB naturally, biologically. So there's headroom to reduce in that range. And instead of just cutting out in all sounds different ways, I kind of handicap myself and put that on there to control that. But there's other ways, reducing EQ, subtractive EQ, even order harmonic saturation, exciters in a warm mode. There's a lot.
Is that Ozone feature a saturation?
No.
What is it doing? Is it compressing?
Multi-band dynamics. it's, to me, it sounds like magic. It's like thousands of micro reductions happening at the same time, dependent and frequency dependent, and it's a bit magical, but it's multi-band dynamics in phase, very fine adjustments, almost what like Spotify is doing in their algorithm to save space on files. These small band reductions dynamically, and they're shifting at all different times.
So conceptually, let's do our usual sort of philosophical thing. If you're trying to reduce harshness, the simplest way to do it is reduce the frequency range with an EQ, but then of course you're losing all of the other parts of that frequency range that are not
all
harsh.
The time.
So
all the time.
Finding
EQ is taking it out.
Finding various strategies to either saturate a little bit and spread out the harmonics over different frequency ranges, or using a multiband compressor or dynamics controller like the Ozone thing, which is a more complicated version of a regular multiband compressor. What that'll do is just take out the little harsh moments or smooth it out overall. So things like Soothe, some of these, they all can do different versions of that.
It's complicated in the background, like any AI or any algorithm that's doing what makes our life easier when we're trying to, get something off the internet with free shipping. Like, we're not thinking about that. It's doing all the work for us, and it's two sliders that say, how much do you want to reduce? And of what character do you want this to sound like after it's reduced? Right.
One thing I would
very
say,
simple.
Yeah. One thing I would say about when we give specific ideas or specific notes, try it a couple of different ways and listen and see what works. And
bypass constantly. Similar to Soothe in a sharp mode. Yes, it is. Yeah. Soothe is very heavy-handed. Soothe 2 is way more figured out by the company than Soothe 1. It's not, I don't reach for it often. It sounds a bit heavy-handed. I'm talking about a bit more of a subtle thing that you have more control over. Soothe is wild. You can fuck up sounds. You can get rid of punchiness and transience with Soothe really easily. So, Soothe doesn't seem to be the best one for things that you want to remain transient and punchy. It seems to soften things a bit too broadly.
So I think this conversation applies to vocals. It seems every week there's a few questions about vocals. How do you get harshness in vocals? How do you mix pop vocals? It was interesting yesterday listening to some of the super bright pop vocals of like some of the Julia Michaels stuff and some of these other things that are really intensely bright. That's a topic that you and I have covered a little bit. I think ideas about saturation, multiband compression. We did a whole hour on saturation, harmonic distortion. I'm also going to do a live with Matt Beckley, who's vocal produced a bunch of huge artists. We're going to do an hour just talking about recording vocals, vocal production. And we'll get into some mixing stuff too. But obviously, you and I talk about that. I don't know if you can. Is there any other thought you have relating that to vocals?
I can. I have a very specific thought that comes to mind. Okay. I don't think that things can be bright, right? Things can be bright. They can be deep. To me, it's the density and the lack of dynamics in the highs or the lows that make things sonically exhausting and samey, for lack of better words. It's just like, there's no emotional shift from a verse to a chorus because the vocal top end is so dense and pressed up against the glass, versus a bright vocal that is dynamic and airy, like Mariah Carey, for example, or when I got to mix Ariana Grande back on her first album, I was trying to kind of mimic that Ariana thing, and it's very airy and very bright, very like 15, 16K, recorded really well, but it was dynamic, meaning there's like a push and pull to her phrasing, and it's not just held up here bright the whole time. It's so hard to listen to a whole pop album because of that high-end density. You can
almost
listen
like
to a single,
a buzz that goes the whole time or something.
And the whole album. I mean, on a single, maybe you can get away with it, but if we're talking about the longevity of an album you want to hear from start to finish, which is rare, but artists still want you to stream their whole album.
Well, their fans are going to listen to all.
Hopefully. That's arguable, but that's not
that's the idea anyway.
That's the idea, exactly. So I'm more concerned with high-end density and its lack of dynamics than the amount of high-end that you have in an EQ. So when I see, and this happens all the time, when you get a session in and every vocal, I think we talked about this probably a few weeks ago, it's like 51 vocals in the session, all the stacks, all the harmonies, it's all done on the same mic, same preamp, same converter, and there's an SSL channel EQ shelving 10K and up on every vocal. Yeah. Let's just, no one talks about the additive nature of this. That's gotta go, right? There's no benefit of that. And that's poor monitoring, right? That's the problem with, you can't hear, so you think, oh, it needs to be brighter, so let's shelf 10K.
Well, and also
not necessarily. Lazy engineering. Yeah, exactly. Like that's cool for a vibe.
I've done it.
I've done it too. Yeah, I'm on no higher ground here, but I did it knowing that I'm taking that off later to reassess in the mix process versus sending it to the mixer like, oh, you do you, but the artist has already lived with that demo for how many months before it's getting mixed, and now it's a losing battle against the mix engineer because they're actually sorting out and placing the backgrounds below the lead, so the lead has the point of view. Oh, why aren't the backgrounds as bright as they were? Well, did they need to be that way? You're only caring about that. This is the demoitis conversation that I still haven't really worked out in my head. You like it that way because you live with it that way. If you lived with the background stacks darker than the lead to begin with, because the vocal producer / engineer delivered it to you like that, you'd probably also like it that way. It's the fact that you're not open to change, and it's not your fault, right? There's got to be a biological level here, this visceral reaction to change that we deem negative, right? Like, oh, it's been this way. Why is it different now? Yeah. Versus some artists are great. Hey, I'm going to live with this over the day. It's different. I could hear why it's different. Let me understand the intention of why you made this different. Like, that's honestly, sadly, few and far between. It's mostly the other one. It's like, oh, it's different, so it's not as good. Yeah. Versus, well, how is it going to translate to the world when it gets released, one, and then 10 years from now, right? Like, how is it going to hold up? Do you only want to make music for today? That's fine, but that needs to be understood as well. Everyone in the team should know that this is a timely record and not timeless. And there's so much to go down that path. But the high end thing really gets me because someone's like, oh, that sounds dark. It's like, no, that's what it sounds like normally. Yes. Right. It's like, it's darker than it was because that's just noise. Yeah, above 10K is noise most of the time.
Well, so let's hit it really quick to sort of recap it with vocals. Some of this applies to mix engineers. Almost all of it applies to sort of the producer, engineer, person who's capturing, recording, that sort of thing. That when you talk about density, if a whole lot of things are recorded the same way with the same EQ and you stack them up, let's say you have a certain EQ boost and you do it a whole bunch of times, that range is going to sound way overly harsh when everything else in the frequency range isn't happening. So things like treating your vocals differently, using some saturation, harmonic distortion to spread out and add more frequency range, treating background vocals differently, maybe even recording them differently than lead vocals. And then the other big thing, which you can't do as a mixer, and we'll get into this when I talk to Matt Beckley, is vocal performance is huge. That there's, when you listen to a song like, like
that's number one.
The ultimate modern pop to me is that I kind of grew up on was the Max Martin stuff. So you listen to a song like Teenage Dream, where it's very breathy, and then some sort of more chest voice comes in halfway through the verse, and then the pre is a little bit more, and then the vocal is actually in a very similar melodic range, but the song progresses beautifully with an emotional change and a timbre change in the voice, so that it actually sounds very dynamic, even though the whole song is just right in your face the whole time. So vocal performance helps a lot. There's all these different aspects to it that are all important.
So thinking about the same EQ, just to go a little bit further outside of vocal world, if you have that stacking that we explained occurring, and then you ask the mixer or the producer before it gets in the mix, hey, can we get more hi-hat? It's like, no, like you kind of can. Yeah. No, so where now does the hi-hat exist in your mix? Does it exist lower? Is it a pitch down hi-hat? Or is it higher than the vocal? Well, if it's higher than the vocal, it's going to be inaudible, right? So we have to think, is your buzzy Juno synth that comes in the chorus audible because it doesn't have enough top end, or because the vocal has too much top end? Or let's not even say the vocal. Let's say the stacks, the background vocal production that you tirelessly did for a week, and you tried every harmony possible, and you worked so hard, and the lazy ass engineer was like, let's just put 10K on, everyone likes bright shit. It's like, no, they don't. They want to hear that lead vocal. Yeah. It's just not, it's just too common for me to speak lightly on. It just happens all the time. And I want, like, okay, let's just say you're sitting behind you is a Juno 6 and you have a Prophet 6, right?
Yep.
Both of those vintage, well, the one on the top is a emulator of a vintage piece of gear.
No,
and the bottom one is vintage.
It's a Voyager.
No, the one on top, I mean the Prophet 6. The Prophet 6 is a remake of the Prophet 5.
Yeah.
Both of those pieces of gear filter off at its highest point of 15K. That is as high as an analog filter on those two pieces of gear ever went, right? So that ought to tell you that you need nothing above that to make that synth sound bright, because those synths are bright as fuck, but they're bright in they're oriented differently. They're oriented lower, right? We think we need all this high end when it only translates to noise. There's no music above 15K. There's air, and it should be used delicately and precisely on certain things.
If everything has air, then nothing. Then
there's nothing has air. So thinking about musicality in a vocal, well, it's in low mids, it's in the body of it. Maybe there's sibilance in 5 or 6K, 7K. We have to adjust. We have to reduce to keep it dynamic. Like, I can't hear above 10K. Nobody can, or they don't know how to decipher the difference. I mean, most playback systems, like what I'm listening to now, you can't hear the difference between 10, 11, 12, 13. I can on my PMCs, which is why I spent however much so I can decipher that to emotionally stack these things so you can feel something from it, right? Like, that's supposed to be our job. Anyway, that's all to say, be careful with your arrangement and your shelving. I'm going to challenge everybody here to not use a shelf for the next month. Don't use any shelf EQ, and be really precise with your bell and your cue. If your engineers here or producer engineers, get rid of the shelf from the vocabulary. I have to say, honestly, I use a shelf 1 to 2% of the time for the last 5 years. I just don't shelf. So I would love to challenge everybody. So that's sick. I got one accepted.
Yeah, there were a number of questions about focusing high end. We only got about 2 minutes left here. Man, we only got to like 3 questions.
Focusing high end is filtering and no shelves.
Filtering and no shelves. I was gonna add to that filtering. Filtering has I've added more filtering to my high end, where I filter things at 12K or 10K. Like guitars, you can filter oftentimes at like 7 or 8K.
7 or 8.
Yeah, and then they fit really nicely. And it turns out that if you want things to not sound harsh, you can actually make the space for things rather, because a lot of times harsh mixes are because a lot of things are competing in the high end, and whether people actually are then turning up too much high end everywhere to try to compensate, which never works, because you can't add 10K to 4 things and make any of them clearer. They're all going to still be just as bright relative to each other. So it's filtering out things and shifting things, and maybe something here is going to hit at 12K and something here is going to hit at 9.5, and the guitars are going to be at 6.5 and below, and all of a sudden it makes sense.
Let's just, someone brought up the phasing introduced when filtering. Yes, that's a thing. You have to be careful. You have to listen. You have to listen to what it's doing and practice and bypass. Phasing in the low end to me is a bit more dangerous. So high passes are a lot more dangerous than low passes. A lot of the time, the roundabout filter and boost technique in the high end is really pleasing and kind of settling things in. It's the same for the bottom, but on things with a lot of low end, the phasing is a thing. Don't use linear phase mode when doing it, because it's going to get rid of thump and transients like we talked about a few weeks ago. So you got to be careful. It's going to induce it, but that's being a pro and understanding that and listening. So let's end there.
Let's end there, man. I apologize to people whose questions we did not get to. I'm going to hit some people on DM. We'll do this again next week. We covered a lot, and there's a lot of other really good questions. There's a lot of business questions about more career arc stuff, so maybe we focus on that next week. I think that's really good. Thank you guys for checking it out. John, love you. It was great having you here yesterday.
So fun.
These PMCs are going to be pretty amazing. And you guys check out Live with Matt Rad Instagram, the YouTubes. We're going to put a bunch more stuff. I've been moving, so I've been a little behind. But thank you guys for sending questions and all that kind of shit. Appreciate you guys very much.
Peace.
Peace, guys.